What happens when a calm, carefully controlled daytime talk show suddenly tilts into something no one in the room is ready for? When a single question pulls a thread, and the entire moment begins to unravel in real time. The lights are warm. The set is familiar. The laughter, rehearsed but comfortable, drifts across the studio like a practiced rhythm. It's just another episode. At least, that's what everyone thinks. Until it isn't. Before we dive into this unforgettable moment, make sure you hit that subscribe button for stage view, like this video, and drop a comment below. Because stories like this, they don't come around often. The cameras roll. There's applause, polite at first, then swelling as the name is announced. Please welcome Ben Affleck. He walks out with that unmistakable presence. Slightly reserved, slightly amused, carrying the weight of someone who has spent decades in front of cameras but never fully surrendered to them. A quick smile. A wave. He sits. Across the table, the hosts lean in with that blend of curiosity and expectation. Among them, Whoopi Goldberg, steady, seasoned, a veteran of moments exactly like this. She's seen it all. Or at least, she thinks she has. The conversation begins easily. Films. Career. A light joke about long shooting days. A quick mention of past roles. Laughter from the audience. Everything feels safe. Ben answers with charm, measured and thoughtful. He's relaxed, but not too relaxed. There's a subtle tension in his posture, something almost imperceptible. A flicker behind the eyes that suggests he's calculating every word. Whoopi notices. She always notices. So, Ben, she begins, her tone casual but deliberate. You've been in this industry a long time. You've seen it change. You've seen the conversations change too, especially about accountability, about how actors handle pressure, media, all of it. He nods slowly. Yeah, it's definitely a different world now. There's a pause. Not long, but just enough. Whoopi leans forward slightly. And you've had your share of headlines. The audience chuckles, somewhat nervously. Ben smiles, but it doesn't quite reach his eyes this time. Yeah, he says quietly. That's one way to put it. Another pause. And this is where it shifts. Because Whoopi doesn't move on. You've talked before about how the media can distort things, but some people would say, sometimes it's not distortion. Sometimes it's just consequences catching up. The room tightens. There's no laughter this time. Even the co-hosts shift in their seats, sensing something is off script. Ben exhales slowly. He looks down for just a second, then back up. His jaw tightens just slightly. That's fair, he says. Sometimes it is. Whoopi watches him closely. But do you think, she continues, her voice steady, that there are moments where you could have handled things differently? Where maybe it wasn't the media. The audience goes silent. This isn't a typical segment anymore. This is something else. Ben leans back in his chair. His fingers interlace for a moment, then separate. He's choosing his next words carefully, but something about his expression has changed. It's sharper now, more present. I think everyone has moments they'd handle differently, he says. That's part of being human. Whoopi nods. But accountability matters, she says. Especially when you're in a position where people are watching, where your actions have influence. And there it is. The line. The one that hangs in the air just a little too long. Ben doesn't respond immediately. And that silence, it stretches. The audience feels it. The hosts feel it. Even the crew behind the cameras feels it. Because something is building. When he finally speaks, his tone is different. Calmer, but firmer. Accountability does matter, he says. But so does context. A murmur ripples through the audience. Whoopi raises an eyebrow just slightly. Context, she repeats. Yeah, Ben says, leaning forward now. Because it's easy to talk about accountability in hindsight. It's easy to point at moments, freeze them, analyze them, and say, this was right, this was wrong. But real life doesn't happen in freeze frames. There's a shift in the energy. It's subtle, but undeniable. Whoopi tilts her head. Are you saying people judge too quickly? I'm saying, Ben replies, that people judge without always understanding the full picture. One of the co-hosts jumps in, trying to soften the moment. Well, that's true for a lot of public figures. But Whoopi doesn't let it go. And whose responsibility is it to provide that full picture? She asks. Now the tension is unmistakable. Ben's gaze locks onto hers. For a second, it feels like the rest of the room disappears. That's the thing, he says quietly. Sometimes there is no way to provide it. Sometimes people have already decided who you are. The audience shifts again, some nodding, some unsure. Whoopi doesn't break eye contact. But doesn't that come with the territory? She presses. You choose to be in the spotlight. And then, something changes in Ben's expression. A flicker of something deeper. Frustration? Exhaustion? Maybe both. You don't choose everything that comes with it, he says. His voice isn't loud, but it lands hard. The room stills. People think they know you, he continues. They think they understand your life, your choices, your mistakes, based on headlines, on clips, on narratives that are built for consumption, not truth. There's a quiet intensity now, the kind that doesn't need volume to command attention. Whoopi leans back slightly, studying him. And are you saying those narratives are always wrong? Ben shakes his head. No, he says. But they're rarely complete. Another pause. Longer this time. The co-hosts exchange glances. This isn't the light segment they expected. This is something raw. Something real. And then Whoopi asks the question that changes everything. So what would you say, she begins slowly, to people who feel like, when they look at your story, they're seeing a pattern? The word hangs in the air. Pattern. It's not just a question. It's a challenge. And everyone in the room knows it. Ben doesn't answer right away. His eyes drop again, but only for a moment. When he looks up, there's something different in them now. Not defensive. Not angry. But resolved. I'd say, he begins, his voice steady but unmistakably charged, that patterns can look very different depending on who's drawing the lines. A ripple moves through the audience. Whoopi's expression tightens, just slightly. And what does that mean? She asks. Ben leans forward. And this time, there's no hesitation. It means, he says, that sometimes people connect dots that were never meant to be connected. They take separate moments, separate decisions, separate struggles, and turn them into a story that fits what they want to believe. The tension peaks. You can feel it. In the silence. In the stillness. In the way no one interrupts. And then, Whoopi responds. Well, sometimes those dots connect themselves. A sharp inhale from somewhere in the audience. And just like that, the line has been crossed. Ben doesn't smile this time. He doesn't deflect. Instead, he meets her gaze fully. And when he speaks, his voice carries a weight that wasn't there before. Or, he says, sometimes people just don't like the picture they see, so they redraw it. The room freezes. Completely. This isn't just an interview anymore. This is a confrontation. And it's only just beginning. For a moment, it feels like the air itself has been pulled out of the studio. No one moves. No one breathes. At least, that's what it feels like to the audience watching from their seats, their living rooms, their phones. The tension isn't loud. It's not explosive. It's something far more dangerous. It's controlled. And right now, control is hanging by a thread. Ben Affleck doesn't look away. Neither does Whoopi Goldberg. The cameras stay locked, capturing every micro-expression, every blink that comes just a fraction too late, every tightening muscle in a jaw that wasn't meant to be noticed. Whoopi shifts slightly in her chair, not retreating, not advancing, but recalibrating. She's been here before. She knows what it means when a conversation stops being a conversation and starts becoming something else entirely. Well, she says, her voice calm but carrying a new edge. That depends on who's holding the pencil. A faint ripple moves through the audience. Some lean forward. Others glance at each other, silently asking the same question. Where's this going? Ben exhales slowly through his nose. His fingers tap once against the table, barely audible, but enough to betray that something is simmering beneath the surface. That's exactly my point, he replies. Most of the time, the person holding the pencil isn't me. There's a murmur now. Subtle but growing. One of the co-hosts shifts, offering a cautious smile. I think what Whoopi's getting at, she interjects gently, is that when you're in the public eye, there's always going to be interpretation. People are going to form opinions. Of course they are. Ben cuts in, not sharply, but firmly enough to reclaim the space. He turns slightly, addressing the table as a whole now, but his focus keeps drifting back to Whoopi. I'm not saying people shouldn't have opinions. I'm saying those opinions become something else when they're treated as fact. Whoopi nods slowly, but her eyes don't soften. But when the same kinds of stories keep coming up, she says, when the same concerns get raised over time, people start to wonder if there's a reason for that. And there it is again. Pattern. Reframed. Reintroduced. Ben leans back, this time slower, more deliberate. He runs a hand across his face, then rests it against his chin, thinking. Or maybe deciding. Let me ask you something, he says. It's a subtle shift, but a powerful one. Now he's not just responding. He's engaging. Whoopi tilts her head. Go ahead. If someone tells a story about you, Ben begins, and then someone else repeats it, and then another person adds their own version of it. At what point does that story stop being about what actually happened and start being about what people believe happened? The audience quiets again, drawn deeper into the moment. Whoopi doesn't answer immediately. She studies him. Are you saying the stories about you aren't true? She asks. Ben shakes his head. No, he says. I'm saying they're incomplete. There's that word again. Incomplete. It lingers. And incomplete stories, he continues, can be just as misleading as false ones. A few audience members nod. Others remain still, unsure. Whoopi leans forward again, her elbows resting lightly on the table. But whose job is it to complete them? She asks. Because from where people sit, they only have what they're given. Ben's expression tightens, not defensively, but with something closer to frustration that's been waiting for the right moment. Sometimes, he says, people aren't interested in having the full story. A beat. They're interested in having a story that confirms what they already think. That lands harder than anything he's said so far. A quiet slips from somewhere in the audience. The co-host to Whoopi's right shifts again, clearly feeling the weight of the exchange. But don't you think, she says carefully, that part of growth is being able to acknowledge how you're perceived, and maybe asking why that perception exists? It's a fair question, a reasonable one. But in this moment, it feels like a spark dropped into dry grass. Ben nods slowly. I do, he says. And I've spent a lot of time doing exactly that. He pauses, then adds more quietly. But there's a difference between reflecting and accepting a version of yourself that doesn't feel real. Whoopi's gaze sharpens. And how do people know which version is real, she asks, if the only version they see is the one that keeps repeating? The question hangs. Heavy. Unavoidable. Ben leans forward again, his voice lowering, not in volume, but in tone. It's more intimate now. More direct. They don't, he says. A ripple of surprise moves through the room. They don't know, he repeats. And that's exactly the problem. Silence. You can't know someone from headlines, he continues. You can't understand a person's life from a collection of moments that were never meant to define them. Whoopi doesn't interrupt this time. She lets him speak. And that's new. But once those moments are out there, she says after a beat, they become part of your story, whether you like it or not. Ben nods. I agree, he says. Another pause. And for a second, it feels like maybe, just maybe, the tension might ease. Like the conversation might find its way back to safer ground. But that doesn't mean they're the whole story, Ben adds. And just like that, the tightrope snaps back into place. Whoopi's lips press together slightly. And what would the whole story look like? She asks. It's not just curiosity now. It's challenge. Ben hesitates. Not because he doesn't have an answer, but because the answer carries weight. The whole story, he says slowly, would include context. It would include the parts people don't see. The struggles that don't make headlines. The decisions that don't get reported because they're not dramatic enough. He glances briefly toward the audience. Then back to Whoopi. It would include the effort to change. The work to be better. There's sincerity there. Raw. Unpolished. And for a brief moment, it shifts the energy again. Whoopi sees it. Everyone does. But she doesn't back down. Then why not tell that story more clearly? She asks. Why not take control of it? And this time, Ben's response comes faster. Because sometimes, he says, no matter how clearly you tell it, people hear what they want to hear. The room tightens again. The back and forth is no longer just a discussion. It's a clash of perspectives. Two different understandings of truth, responsibility, and perception, colliding in real time. One of the co-hosts finally leans in, trying to break the intensity. I think what people are really interested in, she says, is seeing growth, seeing change. And I think that's something you've talked about. I have, Ben says, nodding. And I will continue to. He pauses, then looks back at Whoopi. But growth isn't always visible in the way people expect. That line lands quietly, but deeply. Whoopi exhales, leaning back again. And sometimes, she says, people need to see it to believe it. And there it is again. The divide. Belief versus reality. Perception versus experience. Ben tilts his head slightly. And sometimes, he replies, people need to believe it to see it. A soft gasp escapes somewhere in the audience. Because that's not just a response. That's a statement, a challenge, and maybe a truth no one in the room was prepared to confront. The cameras catch everything. The stillness, the weight, the moment hanging between them like a wire pulled too tight. And just when it feels like the conversation has reached its peak, Whoopi leans forward one more time, her voice steady, measured. But let me ask you this, Ben. A pause, the kind that signals something bigger is coming. If the audience, if the public, has it wrong, then what is it you want them to understand right now? The question lands like a final note before a storm. Because this is the moment, the one where everything shifts. Ben doesn't look away, doesn't hesitate, and when he answers, the entire room changes. I want them to understand, he says, his voice steady but carrying an undeniable intensity, that they're not just watching a story, a beat. They're participating in it. Silence, complete, unshakable, because in that instant, the conversation stops being about him and starts being about everyone watching, and no one is ready for what comes next. The silence that follows doesn't feel empty. It feels exposed, like something invisible has just been pulled into the light, and no one, not the audience, not the hosts, not even the people watching from behind their screens, can quite look at it directly. They're participating in it. The words echo not loudly but persistently. They hang in the air like a truth that wasn't invited, but refuses to leave. For the first time since the conversation turned, Whoopi Goldberg doesn't respond immediately. And that alone says everything. She studies Ben Affleck in a way that's different now, not just as a host guiding a segment, but as someone recalculating the ground beneath her. Because this isn't about headlines anymore. It's about something deeper. You think the audience is responsible, she says finally, her tone careful, deliberate. Ben doesn't rush to answer. His hands rest flat on the table now. No fidgeting, no deflection. Just stillness. I think everyone is, he replies. Including me. A ripple of surprise moves through the crowd. That wasn't defensive. That wasn't evasive. It was direct. Whoopi nods slowly, but her eyes narrow just slightly, as if she's searching for the exact angle to press next. All right, she says. Then let's talk about that. Because responsibility goes both ways. She leans forward again, her voice gaining strength, not louder, but more anchored. When people watch you, when they follow your story, they're reacting to what they see, what they hear, what's put in front of them. You're saying they're part of the narrative, but you're also part of what shapes it. Ben nods once. I agree. There's no hesitation. But something about that agreement doesn't diffuse the tension. It sharpens it. Then help me understand this, Whoopi continues. If you understand the weight of that influence, why does it feel like we keep coming back to the same conversations about you? The question lands heavier than the others. Because this one isn't abstract. It's pointed, specific. The audience shifts, sensing it. A co-host glances sideways, almost instinctively, as if bracing for impact. Ben inhales slowly, his gaze dropping for just a second before returning, steady locked. Because change doesn't happen all at once, he says. Simple, but not soft. And because, he continues, people don't always see the parts that are changing. Whoopi tilts her head. Or, she counters, they don't believe the change is real. There's a murmur, low, uncertain. Ben's expression tightens, not in anger, but in something closer to fatigue meeting resistance. And what makes change real? He asks. Whoopi doesn't hesitate this time. Consistency. The word hits like a drumbeat. Clear. Final. Uncompromising. Consistency over time, she adds. That's what people trust. Ben leans back slightly, absorbing it. Then he nods. Fair, he says. A pause. But consistency also requires space. That word, space, lands differently. Whoopi's brow furrows. Space, she repeats. Yeah, Ben says. Space to grow. Space to fail without it becoming a permanent label. Space to not have every misstep turned into proof that nothing's changed. The audience reacts, some nodding, others still. Whoopi's voice remains steady, but there's a new edge to it now. But that's the reality of being in the public eye, she says. You don't get that kind of space. And there it is. The line between empathy and expectation. Ben exhales, a faint, almost humorless smile crossing his face. Then what you're really saying, he replies, is that growth for people like me has to happen perfectly. A beat. Or it doesn't count. A sharper murmur ripples through the room. Whoopi doesn't smile. That's not what I said. No, Ben agrees. But it's how it works. Silence again. Thicker this time. Because now, this isn't just a discussion about perception. It's a clash of philosophies. One of the co-hosts leans in, her voice softer, trying to bridge the widening gap. I think there's also something to be said about how people connect emotionally to public figures, she says. They feel invested. So when they see something that doesn't align with who they thought you were. She trails off, letting the implication settle. Ben nods. I get that, he says. I really do. He pauses, choosing his next words carefully, but there's less restraint now, less filtering. That connection can be powerful, he continues. But it can also be dangerous. The word lands quietly, but it changes the temperature of the room. Dangerous how? Whoopi asks. Ben's eyes shift briefly toward the audience, toward the cameras, toward the unseen millions beyond them. Because it turns people into characters, he says. Not human beings. The room stills. It turns their lives into narratives that need conflict, that need resolution, that need heroes and villains. His voice is steady, but there's something building underneath it now, something that's been held back for too long. And once that happens, he adds, it's very hard to step outside of the role you've been assigned. Whoopi listens, really listens, but she doesn't retreat. That may be true, she says, but people don't create those roles out of nothing. Another hit, another challenge. Ben nods slowly. No, he says. They don't. A pause. They build them from fragments. The word echoes. Fragments. And those fragments, he continues, are real. I'm not denying that. But they're not the whole picture. Whoopi leans in again, her voice quieter now, but sharper. Then why do the same fragments keep showing up? The question cuts deeper than any before it. The audience feels it. The co-hosts feel it. Even the energy behind the cameras shifts, like something fragile is about to break. Ben doesn't answer immediately. For the first time, the silence feels uncertain. Not controlled. Not strategic. But real. He looks down. His fingers press lightly against the table. And when he finally speaks, his voice is different. Lower. More personal. Because some lessons take longer to learn than others. The honesty in that line changes everything. The tension doesn't disappear, but it transforms. Whoopi sees it. The audience sees it. It's no longer just confrontation. It's confession. And are you still learning them? Whoopi asks, her tone softer now, but no less direct. Ben looks up, meets her gaze. Yes, he says. No hesitation. No defense. Just truth. The room exhales, but only slightly. Because even in this moment of vulnerability, the questions haven't ended. They've only changed. Whoopi leans back, folding her hands in front of her. Then let me ask you something else, she says. A pause. If you're still learning, if you're still growing, what do you say to the people who've already made up their minds about you? The question lingers. Heavy. Final. Ben's expression steadies. There's no frustration now. No edge. Just clarity. I'd say, he begins, that I understand why they feel the way they do. A ripple of surprise again. But I'd also say they're seeing a version of me that I'm actively trying to move beyond. He pauses. And I hope, he adds quietly, that at some point they're willing to see that too. Silence. Deep. Unbroken. And then, for the first time since this all began, Whoopi Goldberg doesn't push back immediately. She just looks at him. Not as an opponent. Not even as a host. But as someone standing in the middle of something complicated, something unfinished. The audience shifts, unsure whether to clap, to react, to breathe. Because the moment isn't over. Not yet. There's something still unresolved. Something still hanging between them. And just as it feels like the conversation might finally settle, Whoopi speaks again. Quietly. But understanding isn't always enough. The words land softly. But they carry weight. Ben doesn't flinch. I know, he says. A beat. But it's a start. And in that moment, the tension doesn't disappear. It evolves into something deeper, more uncomfortable, more real. Because now, the conversation isn't just about what happened. It's about what happens next. And no one, not the audience, not the hosts, not even Ben himself, knows exactly what that's going to look like. The moment doesn't end when the camera's cut. That's the illusion. That everything intense, everything uncomfortable, everything real, stays contained within the frame, wrapped up neatly between commercial breaks and closing music. But this was never going to stay inside the studio, because even as the final words hang in the air, it's a start. You can feel it. The shift, the fracture, the quiet understanding that something just happened, and it's going to follow everyone out of this room. For a split second, no one speaks. Then, almost hesitantly, the audience begins to clap. It's not the loud, explosive applause of a triumphant moment. It's uneven, uncertain. Some people clap because they feel they should, others because they genuinely felt something shift. And a few don't clap at all. They just sit there, processing. At the table, the co-hosts exchange glances, the kind that don't need words. One offers a small smile, another adjusts her notes, pretending to reset the tone. But the tone doesn't reset. Not really. Whoopi Goldberg leans back in her chair, her expression composed, but quieter now. Less confrontational. More reflective. Well, she says finally, her voice measured. This has been a conversation. A faint ripple of nervous laughter moves through the room. Ben Affleck nods once, a subtle acknowledgement. Not of victory, not of defeat, but of something shared. Something difficult. Yeah, he says. It has. There's no neat resolution. No final joke to smooth things over. Just that. The show moves on, because it has to. A new segment is introduced. A different topic. A lighter tone. But the energy never quite recovers. Because everyone is still carrying what just happened. And then the cameras finally cut. The studio lights dim slightly. The audience begins to stir, voices rising into a low hum as people turn to each other. Did that just happen? Was that planned? He really said that. Fragments of conversation scatter across the room, echoing the very thing they had just been debating. How stories are built, piece by piece, perspective by perspective. At the table, the hosts stand. Some stretch. Some gather their notes. Whoopi remains seated for a moment longer. Still. Thoughtful. Ben stands too, adjusting his jacket. For a brief second, their eyes meet again. No tension this time. Just recognition. Of the moment. Of what it was. Of what it might become. Then it passes. And they move on. But outside that studio, the moment explodes. Clips begin circulating within minutes. Short, sharp segments of the exchange. Edited, captioned, reframed. Ben Affleck claps back. Whoopi Goldberg puts him on the spot. Awkward tension on live TV. Each version tells a slightly different story. Each one draws its own lines between the dots. On platforms like X and YouTube, the reactions pour in faster than anyone can keep up. One post reads, "This is the most honest I've seen Ben in years. Respect." Another fires back. "He dodged accountability again. Same pattern, different words." A third cuts through with something simpler. "That wasn't an interview. That was a standoff." And just like that, the conversation continues. Not in one place, but everywhere. Clips are slowed down, analyzed frame by frame. Body language experts weigh in. Commentators dissect tone, phrasing, intent. Notice how he leans forward here. Look at Whoopi's expression when he says that. It's subtle, but that's where the shift happens. Articles appear within hours. Headlines sharpen the edges even further, distilling a complex, layered exchange into something clickable. Something definitive. But the truth? The truth is anything but definitive. Because for every person who sees vulnerability in Ben's words, there's someone else who sees deflection. For every viewer who feels Whoopi pushed too hard, there's another who believes she didn't push hard enough. And somewhere in the middle, the moment itself starts to blur, becoming exactly what they had been talking about. A story, built from fragments, shaped by perception, reinforced by repetition. Days pass, but it doesn't fade. It evolves. Late-night shows reference it. Podcasts debate it. Reaction videos rack up millions of views, each one offering a new interpretation, a new angle, a new truth. And with every retelling, the lines are redrawn. Ben breaks his silence a few days later in a brief interview clip. Calm, composed, choosing his words carefully. "I think it was an honest conversation," he says. "And I think those are important to have, even when they're uncomfortable." Short, measured, but enough to reignite everything. Because now the question isn't just what happened. It's what did it mean? Back on the set of The View, the hosts address it too. Whoopi speaks, her tone steady. "We ask questions here," she says. "That's our job. And sometimes those questions lead to real conversations. That's not a bad thing. Again, not a resolution, just another perspective. And the audience? They're still deciding, still debating, still participating. Because that's what Ben said, wasn't it? That they're part of it. And now they are. More than ever. The moment has left the studio, but it hasn't ended. It's everywhere. In comments, in conversations, in quiet reflections people don't even realize they're having. And maybe that's the real aftermath. Not the tension, not the confrontation, but the ripple effect. The way a single exchange can spread, shift, and settle into something larger than itself. Something ongoing, something unresolved. And now it turns to you. What did you see in that moment? Was it honesty or deflection? Growth or repetition? A fair question or an unfair push? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because your perspective is part of the story too. And if you want more moments like this, more tension, more truth, more stories that pull you inside the scene, make sure you subscribe to Stage View, like this video, and stay tuned. Because the next moment, it might be even bigger.